She had 3 seconds. 3 seconds before the fake waiter reached for the gun hidden beneath his jacket. 3 seconds before the most powerful man in the city died at table 12. Tessa's hands shook as she grabbed the napkin. Her father's voice echoed, "Never get involved, never be seen." But the assassin's hand was moving, and Gianni Rourke had no idea death was standing 3 feet away. She wrote 4 words, folded the fabric, placed it beside his glass. Fake waiter. Armed. Left side. Gianni's eyes hit the napkin, then lifted to hers. In that split second, Tessa realized she'd made a choice she could never take back. He stood, moved, signaled his men. The restaurant erupted in controlled chaos. The assassin's weapon cleared his jacket, and 2 men in dark suits materialized, containing the threat with surgical precision. Gianni walked toward her through the frozen dining room. His eyes, storm gray, assessing, claiming. "What's your name?" "Tessa." "You just saved my life, Tessa." And that's when she understood. In his world, saving someone didn't earn freedom. It earned obligation. Protection that felt like captivity. Because Gianni Rourke never forgot a debt, and he never let go of what belonged to him. What happened next changed everything. Tessa Rowan's fingers froze mid-reach for the wine bottle when she noticed the new server's shoulders. Too stiff, too military, positioned with the unconscious readiness of someone trained to draw a weapon rather than carry appetizers. 6 months working at Bella Costa had taught her to read the subtle language of the city's most exclusive dining room, where power brokers sealed deals over veal piccata and senators maintained relationships that required discretion. But this man's presence screamed wrongness in a frequency only she could hear. The Thursday evening crowd filled the restaurant with its usual symphony, crystal touching crystal, murmured conversations about real estate acquisitions and offshore accounts, the occasional burst of laughter from the private dining alcove. Tessa moved through it all with practiced efficiency, her community college psychology textbooks waiting in her locker for the post-shift study session that would stretch past 2 a.m. She'd perfected the art of being invisible while seeing everything, a skill born from necessity rather than choice. What Tessa didn't know was that the choice she was about to make would destroy the ordinary life she'd fought so hard to build, and trap her in a world where protection and possession were the same thing. She'd learned hypervigilance from her father, whose paranoia had transformed their childhood home into a fortress of locked doors and emergency plans. What began as survival had evolved into involuntary cataloging. Every face, every inconsistency, every detail that didn't belong. By age 12, she could identify undercover cops in civilian clothes, spot the difference between authentic designer bags and convincing fakes, read body language that revealed intent before words were spoken. Her mother had called it anxiety. Her therapist had called it hypervigilance disorder. Tessa called it Tuesday. Table 12 held its usual occupant. The man who arrived precisely at 9 every Thursday and departed exactly 2 hours later. Gianni Rourke possessed the kind of quiet authority that made veteran servers behave like nervous apprentices, his tailored charcoal suit probably costing more than her entire year's tuition. He was the reason Bella Costa's manager personally inspected Table 12's setting before his arrival, why the sommelier kept a specific Barolo breathing 30 minutes early, why the kitchen's timing became militarily precise the moment his reservation appeared on the system. Tessa had studied him during her 6 months here, not from attraction, though he was objectively striking with his sharp jawline and steel-gray eyes, but from the same instinct that made her memorize fire exits. Gianni Rourke was dangerous. Not in the obvious way of drunk businessmen who grabbed at servers, but in the controlled way of apex predators who moved through the world, certain of their dominance. People whispered about him in the service alley, whispers that dried up the moment management appeared, conversations that involved words like family business and don't ask questions. The moment he read that napkin, Tessa would become his responsibility, whether she wanted to be or not. And in his world, responsibility meant ownership. The false server had been introduced during the evening briefing as temporary coverage for sick leave, but everything about him registered as performance rather than reality. His uniform fit wrong, too loose in the shoulders, suggesting he'd been sized quickly rather than properly fitted. He wore black athletic shoes instead of the required leather Oxfords, and his questions about table assignments focused entirely on the northeast corner where Gianni always sat, ignoring the 20 other tables that required equal attention. Tessa watched him refill water glasses with mechanical precision, his left hand staying too close to his torso, the subtle bulk beneath his server's jacket inconsistent with the slim-fit uniform issued by Bella Costa's management. Every circuit through the dining room brought him closer to table 12, his path narrowing with mathematical certainty, like a shark spiraling toward prey. The kitchen staff had never seen him before tonight. Tessa had confirmed during a quick exchange while picking up orders, her question casual enough to avoid suspicion, but pointed enough to gather information. The manager's explanation about the staffing agency had sounded rehearsed, delivered with slightly elevated pitch that indicated deception, the same vocal pattern her father used when lying about why they needed to change apartments again, why they couldn't list their phone number, why she couldn't tell anyone her real last name until she turned 18. She'd memorized the faces of every regular employee during her 6 months at Bella Costa, a habit born from the same instinct that made her count security cameras. The false server's badge looked legitimate enough, professionally printed, properly formatted, but the plastic still carried that fresh-from-the-printer sheen, and his fingerprints smudged across its surface, suggesting recent handling rather than weeks of wear. What Tessa was about to do would save one life and put her own in danger she couldn't possibly imagine. He'd checked his watch 4 times in the past 15 minutes, each glance accompanied by a subtle adjustment of his stance, weight shifting from foot to foot, hand drifting toward his jacket's interior. The movements weren't about time management. They were countdown markers, the kind of nervous ritual people performed when approaching a deadline that couldn't be postponed. His breathing had changed too, shifting from normal service rhythm into something more controlled and deliberate, the measured inhale-exhale pattern of someone managing adrenaline, preparing for action that required steady hands and clear judgment. The false server's questions to other staff members had revealed another critical inconsistency. He didn't know basic details about the restaurant's layout. He'd asked where to find dessert spoons after supposedly working 3 hours, inquired about table numbering systems that were clearly marked on the floor plan, and showed confusion about the kitchen's traffic patterns that any real employee would have absorbed within their first shift. The city's November evening had brought typical clientele through Bella Costa's doors. Venture capitalists celebrating successful exits, surgeons entertaining pharmaceutical reps, the occasional judge maintaining relationships that required expensive wine and absolute discretion. But Gianni remained the only guest who transformed the entire staff's demeanor, whose reservation prompted the owner to personally taste test his entree, whose presence meant larger tips and zero tolerance for errors. Gianni ordered his standard Macallan 18, neat, and opened his leather portfolio to pages filled with neat columns of figures. But Tessa had observed him long enough to detect the microscopic tells, the way his eyes tracked peripheral movement without moving his head, the angle of his shoulders suggesting readiness despite relaxed posture, the specific placement of his phone on the table's edge, screen facing down but within instant reach. The false server made his move during the dinner rush, when attention fragmented across dozens of simultaneous demands. He repositioned himself near the beverage station closest to table 12, his path requiring no legitimate reason to be there, his focus narrowing with predatory intensity. His right hand had moved to his jacket's interior, fingers resting against something that created an outline she recognized from her father's old service weapon. Compact, concealed, deadly. Time was running out, and the decision Tessa made in the next 10 seconds would determine whether she remained invisible or became the most visible target in the city. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed a linen napkin from the service stand. Her pen, borrowed from her apron pocket where she kept notes about psychological terms for studying, felt heavy as she scrawled 9 words in compressed block letters, the handwriting barely controlled. Listen. Fake waiter. Armed, left side. She folded the napkin into a precise rectangle, the fabric concealing her handwriting, and lifted a leather-bound dessert menu from its display stand with fingers that somehow remained steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her bloodstream. Her approach to table 12 felt like walking underwater, each step requiring conscious effort while her peripheral vision tracked the false server's position, 15 feet away, hands still inside his jacket, eyes locked on Gianni's profile with the focused intensity of someone about to commit irrevocable action. Gianni glanced up from his portfolio as she arrived, his expression polite but distant, the mask of a man accustomed to service staff remaining invisible. His eyes were gunmetal gray, carrying the kind of cold assessment that made her understand why managers became servants in his presence. Tessa placed the dessert menu at the table's edge with her left hand, while her right set the folded napkin directly beside his crystal tumbler. The placement deliberate, impossible to miss. Her voice emerged calm and professional as she asked if he required anything else, though her pulse roared in her ears like standing too close to subway tracks. Gianni's fingers touched the napkin, lifted it with casual grace as if accepting a simple courtesy. His eyes dropped to read what she'd written. The change in him was microscopic. A fractional tightening around his jaw, a barely perceptible shift in his breathing pattern, the slight dilation of his pupils that indicated adrenaline recognition. But Tessa saw the moment comprehension landed, saw the instant his casual dinner transformed into tactical assessment. His gaze lifted to meet hers for exactly 3 seconds. In that moment, everything changed. Tessa had just saved a mafia boss and sealed her own fate. In those eyes, she saw winter steel, controlled violence, and something that might have been respect. He didn't nod, didn't speak, didn't need to. The acknowledgement passed between them in the language of people who understood danger intimately. Gianni stood with fluid grace, folding the napkin and tucking it into his jacket pocket as if it were simply another business document. His movement toward the kitchen was unhurried, conversational even, as he caught the owner's attention with a subtle gesture that demanded immediate compliance. The owner's face drained of color as Gianni spoke quietly near the kitchen entrance, his words inaudible but their effect immediate. Within seconds, 2 men in dark suits materialized from the private dining room, not obviously armed, but carrying themselves with the controlled readiness of professionals who understood violence as vocation rather than passion. Gianni disappeared through the swinging doors that led to the prep area and service alley beyond, flanked by his men, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the weight of what Tessa had just set in motion. The false server's head snapped toward table 12 the moment he registered Gianni's absence. His professional mask shattered, revealing something feral underneath as his hand moved fully inside his jacket with purpose that no longer pretended hospitality. The weapon was clearing its holster when he realized the room had shifted. The 2 men in dark suits had repositioned, blocking both his path to the exit and his line of sight to the kitchen. Their movements were economical, professional, the choreography of people who'd done this before. The maitre d' had somehow relocated all nearby diners with impressive speed, creating a buffer zone that suggested this wasn't Bella Costa's first experience with situations requiring discretion. Tessa forced herself to continue her route through adjacent tables, collecting empty plates and refilling wine glasses as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Her hands moved through familiar motions while her mind screamed warnings about what happened when you inserted yourself into situations that existed beyond civilian understanding. Lessons learned from her father's paranoia that suddenly felt less like madness and more like prophecy. But the real danger wasn't the assassin being dragged away. It was the man walking toward her, the one who now saw her as his. The false server's calculation played across his face in rapid succession. Fight, flight, the mathematics of survival against impossible odds. He chose retreat, backing toward the main entrance with his weapon now visible, his eyes darting between the suited men and the nearest exit, his training warring with panic. But Gianni had already returned through the kitchen doors, positioning himself to intercept the front approach. His phone was pressed to his ear with casual authority, and though Tessa couldn't hear his words, she saw their effect ripple through the restaurant. Servers melting into corners, diners suddenly fascinated by their plates, the entire room collectively deciding to become invisible. The false server made it 3 steps before Gianni's men closed the distance with practiced efficiency. No violence, no drama, just professional containment, executed with the smooth precision of people who'd refined the art of making problems disappear. Within 30 seconds, the man was being escorted through the kitchen's rear entrance, his weapon secured, his mission terminated, his future undoubtedly bleak. Gianni's eyes found Tessa across the dining room. That gaze carried weight she felt physically. Assessment, acknowledgement, and something more dangerous. She'd saved his life with a napkin and 9 words. In his world, that created obligations, debts, connections that couldn't be severed with simple gratitude. She'd spent her entire life running from the chaos her father's paranoia had invited into their world. Had built a careful existence of community college classes, overnight shifts, and absolute anonymity. A life designed to be ordinary, safe, forgettable. In 3 seconds, she'd destroyed it all. Because Gianni Rourke was walking toward her now, his expression unreadable, his presence commanding absolute attention despite the resumed normalcy of the dining room around them. And Tessa realized with crystal clarity that ordinary was no longer an option. She'd just stepped into a world where people communicated with folded napkins and concealed weapons, where dinner reservations masked territorial negotiations, where saving someone's life meant entering their orbit whether you wanted to or not. What he was about to say would make one thing perfectly clear. She wasn't getting her old life back. Gianni stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that she could see the exact shade of gray in his eyes, storm clouds over steel, and smell the faint scent of his cologne mixing with adrenaline. "What's your name?" His voice was pitched low, meant only for her, carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. Brooklyn, maybe, or New Jersey, softened by years of upward mobility, but never fully erased. "Tessa." The word came out steadier than she felt. "Tessa Rowan." "Tessa." He tested her name like he was memorizing it, cataloging it in whatever mental database men like him kept. "You just saved my life." She wanted to deflect, to minimize, to retreat into the invisibility that had kept her safe for 6 months. But something in his gaze told her that ship had sailed the moment she'd written those 9 words. "I noticed something wrong," she said simply. "I thought you should know." "Most people don't notice." Gianni's expression shifted fractionally, respect mixing with curiosity. "And the ones who do notice don't interfere. They look away. They protect themselves." "I couldn't." The truth emerged before she could stop it. "I saw what he was planning. I couldn't just walk away." Gianni finished for her, something in his tone suggesting he understood exactly what that instinct cost. "No, you couldn't." He reached into his jacket, the same motion that had nearly gotten the false server shot, and extracted a business card. Cream-colored paper, expensive weight, embossed with simple text. A name, a phone number, nothing else. No company, no title, just identity and access. "Someone will want to talk to you about what you saw, what you noticed." He pressed the card into her palm, his fingers warm against her skin. Tomorrow, noon, this address. It wasn't a request. And Tessa? He held her gaze, his voice dropping another register. Thank you. For the warning. For the choice you made. Not everyone would have made it. Then he was gone, returning to table 12 where a fresh Macallan waited, his portfolio open, his posture relaxed, as if armed assassins were simply another inconvenience in a long day of managing inconveniences. Tessa stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, the business card burning in her palm, the weight of his gratitude, and his expectation pressing against her chest like a physical force. She'd spent 24 years learning to disappear, to avoid notice, to keep herself separate from the chaos that had defined her childhood. Had mastered the art of being nobody, of sliding through life without leaving fingerprints or forwarding addresses. But Gianni Rourke had seen her, really seen her, in a way that made invisibility impossible. And she realized with absolute certainty that her careful, ordinary life had just ended. The question was, what came next? What Tessa didn't understand yet was that in Gianni's world, debts were paid in loyalty, and loyalty meant forever. Tessa had been 7 years old the first time her father made her memorize exit routes from a shopping mall. Not the normal entrances. Anyone could find those. He'd taught her about service corridors hidden behind employee-only doors, loading docks that connected to underground parking, the gap between the dumpster enclosure and the rear fence that a small body could squeeze through if necessary. By 10, she could identify plainclothes security in any crowd. By 12, she knew the difference between someone carrying concealed legally and someone carrying with intent. By 15, she understood her father wasn't paranoid. He was a former federal witness whose testimony had put dangerous people in prison, and the hypervigilance wasn't illness. It was survival. Her mother had left when Tessa was 9, unable to sustain the constant vigilance, the midnight relocations, the aliases that changed like seasons. Tessa stayed because she had no choice, absorbing her father's lessons until they became reflex rather than conscious thought. He died when she was 17. Heart attack, the coroner said, though Tessa suspected the decades of adrenaline had simply exhausted the organ's capacity to keep beating. She'd inherited his instincts but not his reasons, left with a skill set designed for a threat level that no longer existed. Therapy had helped. Dr. Chen had taught her cognitive behavioral techniques, mindfulness practices, ways to distinguish between actual danger and perceived threat. But reprogramming 20 years of conditioning was like trying to forget a language. The vocabulary remained even when you stopped speaking it. She still counted exits, still cataloged faces, still noticed the things other people missed. Working at Bella Costa should have triggered constant anxiety. The tight spaces, the unpredictable clientele, the lack of clear escape routes. Instead, it had become oddly soothing. The patterns were consistent. The threats were manageable. Demanding customers, kitchen chaos, the occasional drunk businessman who needed firm boundaries. Nothing that required the full arsenal of survival skills her father had drilled into her nervous system. Until tonight. But the skills her father taught her, the ones that saved Gianni Rourke, had just trapped her in the very world her father died escaping. The false server had triggered every alarm her father had installed in her psyche. The wrong shoes weren't just a uniform violation. They were tactical footwear designed for rapid movement. The hand position wasn't casual. It was trained, the stance of someone who'd drawn weapons until the motion became muscle memory. The watch checking wasn't time management. It was synchronization, the kind of nervous countdown people performed before executing plans that couldn't be postponed. She'd seen her father do the same thing before testifying, before meetings with his handlers, before any situation where timing mattered and mistakes had consequences measured in blood rather than inconvenience. The false server carried that same energy, compressed violence waiting for permission to explode. Writing those 9 words should have felt like overstepping, like inserting herself into situations that existed beyond her authority or understanding. Instead, it had felt like inevitability, like every lesson her father had taught her had been preparing for exactly this moment. She'd seen the threat. She'd assessed the target. She'd acted with the cold efficiency of someone who understood that hesitation was how good people died while wondering if they should have said something. But now, watching Gianni Rourke walk away with that business card burning in her palm, Tessa felt the full weight of what her father had always warned her about. Recognition was dangerous. Being noticed was dangerous. Stepping out of the shadows meant stepping into someone's crosshairs, and she'd just painted a target on herself that no amount of therapy or cognitive reframing could erase. She'd spent 7 years building a life designed to be forgettable. One napkin had destroyed it all. The address on Gianni's card led to a private social club in a neighborhood where buildings didn't advertise their purpose and security cameras covered every angle. Tessa arrived at noon exactly, her shift manager's confused permissions still echoing in her ears. Apparently, when Gianni Rourke requested your presence, Bellacosta's policies about schedule changes became suddenly flexible. What Tessa was about to learn would make one thing clear. She wasn't a hero who'd saved a life. She was a witness who'd become a liability. The man who answered the unmarked door was built like a defensive lineman, his suit tailored to minimize rather than emphasize his bulk. He didn't ask her name, just stepped aside with the resigned expression of someone who'd been told to expect her and didn't question orders. The interior was old money trying to look modest. Leather furniture that cost more than cars. Artwork that belonged in museums. The kind of understated wealth that didn't need to prove anything. Gianni sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, a tumbler of amber liquid untouched on the side table. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, one dark-haired and compact, radiating controlled energy. The other broader, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow and eyes that assessed her like she was a tactical problem requiring solution. Tessa Rowan. Gianni gestured to the chair opposite him. Thank you for coming. She sat because standing felt like retreat, though every instinct screamed that being in this room was a mistake she'd spend years trying to correct. You didn't really give me a choice. No, he agreed, something like approval flickering across his expression. I didn't. Because what happened last night created a situation that requires clarification. The compact man spoke, his voice carrying a trace of Italian accent. You saved his life. That creates obligations, connections. In our world, debts like that don't get settled with thank you notes. Rico, Johnny's tone carried warning. Let me handle this. Rico stepped back fractionally, but his attention never left Tessa's face. The other man remained statue still, his scarred features revealing nothing. What Gianni was about to tell her would destroy any illusion that she could simply walk away from this. The man you identified was Luca Draven, Gianni said. Professional. Expensive. The kind of contractor you hire when failure isn't acceptable and discretion is mandatory. He was sent by people who've been trying to remove me from certain business negotiations for the past 6 months. You interrupted a very carefully planned operation. Tessa's throat tightened. Is that supposed to make me feel better or worse? Neither. It's supposed to make you understand reality. Gianni leaned forward, his gray eyes holding hers with uncomfortable intensity. Luca didn't work alone. He had employers, logistics support, intelligence that told him exactly where I'd be and when. Those people now know their operation failed. They'll want to understand why. And when they review security footage, when they debrief their sources inside Bellacosta, they'll identify exactly who warned me. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. So I'm a witness. You're a liability, the scarred man said flatly, his voice carrying Brooklyn origins. To them. which means you're our problem now. I'm Declan, by the way, since we're going to be spending time together. I don't want protection, Tessa said, though even as the words emerged, she heard how naive they sounded. I just want to go back to my life. That life ended the moment you wrote on that napkin. Gianni's voice was gentle but absolute. I'm sorry. Truly. You made a choice that saved me, and the cost is your anonymity. But I don't leave debts unpaid, and I don't abandon people who put themselves at risk for me. You're under Venturi protection now, whether you want it or not. She saw danger. She acted. And now she's trapped in a life she never chose. Because saving someone powerful doesn't earn freedom. It earns ownership. If you've ever felt punished for helping someone, for speaking up when you saw something wrong, for refusing to look away, leave a comment below. This is Tessa's impossible choice. Accept protection that feels like captivity, or face the people who view her as a threat that needs eliminating. In a world where doing the right thing destroys your life, what would you choose? Hit subscribe if you believe some acts of courage shouldn't cost everything, because what happens next will test whether Tessa can survive the consequences of her own compassion. Tessa's hands fisted in her lap. This was her father's world, the one he died trying to escape, the one that had stolen her childhood and made normal impossible. She'd spent 7 years building distance from it, and one act of conscience had dragged her right back in. For how long? Her voice came out smaller than intended. Until the threat is neutralized. Gianni's expression softened fractionally. Or until you stop being useful leverage, whichever comes first. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be honest. He stood, and the movement made both Rico and Declan shift their positions automatically. Rico and Declan will coordinate your security. You'll continue your normal routine as much as possible, but they'll be watching. Always. I'm told you're observant enough to notice. I noticed Luca, she said quietly. Exactly. Which means you're exactly as dangerous to them as I am. Gianni moved to the door, then paused. One more thing. You didn't have to warn me. You could have looked away, protected yourself, let nature take its course. But you chose to interfere. That tells me something about who you are. I want you to know, I see you, Tessa Rowan, the girl who sees everything. And I won't forget what you did. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with 2 bodyguards and the ruins of her carefully constructed ordinary life. What Tessa didn't know was that the people who hired Luca had already identified her, and they were planning their response. The first indication that Gianni's warning wasn't paranoia came 3 days later. Tessa was walking home from her afternoon class, her backpack heavy with psychology textbooks, her mind occupied with an upcoming exam on trauma response theory. The irony of studying hypervigilance while living it wasn't lost on her. She noticed the car first. Black sedan, tinted windows, engine running, parked in a loading zone with the casual disregard of people who didn't worry about parking tickets. It had been there when she'd entered the building 2 hours ago, which meant either someone was waiting for a very late pickup or the vehicle had purpose beyond legitimate parking. Her father's training kicked in automatically. She crossed the street without changing pace, using the reflection in a storefront window to track the sedan's position. 2 figures inside, both front seats, attention fixed on the building's main entrance. Waiting. Watching. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Turn around. Walk back toward campus. Now. The text carried no signature, but she recognized the authority in those 4 words. Rico or Declan, probably both. Somewhere in her periphery doing exactly what Gianni had promised. Watching always. The extraction happened in seconds, but what came next would prove that Gianni's protection wasn't paranoia. It was the only thing keeping her alive. Tessa kept walking, her heart rate climbing but her pace steady. Showing fear was showing weakness. Another lesson from her father's survival manual. The sedan's engine revved, the sound carrying across the street with predatory intent. A second car appeared from nowhere, dark SUV, windows equally tinted, sliding between Tessa and the sedan with the practiced timing of people who'd executed this maneuver before. The sedan's doors opened and Rico materialized beside her, his hand gentle but insistent on her elbow. "Keep moving. Don't look back." Declan's handling the conversation. She caught a glimpse of Declan standing beside the sedan's driver door, his posture relaxed but his body language screaming threat. The sedan's occupants chose discretion, pulling away with controlled speed that suggested retreat rather than defeat. Rico guided her into the SUV's back seat, his movements efficient but careful, like handling something breakable. The driver pulled into traffic smoothly. No dramatics, no squealing tires, just professional extraction executed with the kind of precision that came from extensive practice. "Who were they?" Tessa's voice was steadier than her hands. "Reconnaissance. Probably trying to confirm your routine, your vulnerabilities." Rico settled into the seat beside her, close enough to intervene but far enough to avoid crowding. "You were made 3 days ago. Facial recognition from Bellacosta's security footage. The people who hired Luca are very motivated to understand why their investment failed." "So what happens now?" "Now you disappear for a while. Nothing dramatic, just relocate somewhere they can't easily access. Gianni has a property that's secure, defensible, and most importantly, unknown to people who'd want to use you for leverage." What Tessa was about to discover, protection in Gianni's world meant giving up everything: freedom, privacy, control. But the alternative was death. Tessa's stomach dropped. "You're taking me to a safe house." "We're taking you somewhere safe," Rico corrected. "The house part is negotiable. But yes, your apartment isn't secure. Your campus has too many access points, and Bellacosta is obviously compromised. You need to be somewhere we control." "For how long?" "Until we neutralize the threat or negotiate terms that remove you from the equation." His expressions softened fractionally. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but you saved Johnny's life. And in our world, that creates bonds that don't break just because they're inconvenient. You're ours now, under our protection. Part of our responsibility." The possessive language should have triggered rebellion. Instead, Tessa felt something disturbingly close to relief. Her father had spent 17 years looking over his shoulder, trusting no one, depending on government handlers who viewed him as an asset rather than a person. She'd inherited his hypervigilance, but not his isolation. And the idea of having someone watching her back, really watching, professionally, with resources and commitment, was seductive in ways she didn't want to examine. "What about my classes? My job? My life?" "Your professors will be notified you're dealing with a family emergency. Bellacosta's been informed you're taking personal leave. Your life continues, just in a different location with better security." Rico's voice carried the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. "We're not kidnapping you, Tessa. We're protecting you from people who absolutely will. There's a difference." The SUV pulled into an underground garage, security gates closing behind them with mechanical finality. Tessa recognized the architecture: upscale residential building, the kind where doormen wore suits and residents valued privacy over community. "Where are we?" "Secure location. Gianni's building. Penthouse level." Declan appeared at the vehicle's door, his scarred face betraying nothing. "Welcome to protective custody, Miss Rowan. Try not to hate it too much." She stepped out into the garage, her backpack feeling suddenly heavier, her carefully constructed life disappearing in the rearview mirror like smoke. This was her father's nightmare made real, drawn into a world where normal didn't exist, and safety required constant vigilance. But unlike her father, she wasn't alone. And somehow, that made all the difference. The penthouse was excessive in the way only genuinely wealthy people achieved. Understated luxury that didn't need to prove anything. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Art that belonged in galleries. Furniture that prioritized comfort over fashion. A prison designed by someone who understood that gilded cages were still cages, just more expensive ones. But what Tessa was about to realize, the real danger wasn't the penthouse walls keeping her in. It was what would happen if she tried to leave. Rico deposited her bags. Someone had collected them from her apartment, which should have felt invasive but mostly felt efficient. In a guest room that was larger than her entire previous living space. Declan and I will rotate shifts, one of us awake and alert at all times. You'll have privacy, but you won't be unobserved. That's non-negotiable. What if I want to leave? Then one of us accompanies you. This isn't captivity, Tessa. It's protection. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. His expression gentled. I understand this is difficult, but the people looking for you don't send polite requests. They send professionals like Luca, and they don't accept failure twice. Declan appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. Security protocols. Panic buttons in every room. Reinforced door frames. Bulletproof windows. This place is a fortress disguised as a luxury apartment. You're safer here than anywhere else in the city. Except I'm trapped. Except you're alive, Declan corrected, his Brooklyn accent sharpening. Which is the entire point. Gianni doesn't do half measures. You're under his protection now, which means you get the full treatment. Armed guards, secure location, resources most people can't access. You could do worse. Tessa sank onto the guest room's bed, exhaustion finally catching up with adrenaline. I just wanted a normal life. Community college, waitressing, maybe grad school eventually. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, just ordinary. Ordinary ended when you wrote on that napkin. Rico's voice was gentle but firm. You can't unsee what you saw. Can't unknow what you know. The question isn't whether your life changed, it's how you survive the change. And sitting in a penthouse with 2 bodyguards is survival? Better than the alternative. Declan leaned against the doorframe, his scarred features revealing nothing. Luca's employers don't leave witnesses. They especially don't leave witnesses who cost them 7 figures and a blown operation. You think we're overreacting? We buried 3 people last year who thought they didn't need protection. Smart people. Careful people. Dead people. The bluntness was like cold water. Tessa looked up at both men, seeing them clearly for the first time, not as impositions or obstacles, but as the only thing standing between her and people who viewed murder as business expense. But the man she was about to see would complicate everything. Because protection from Gianni Rourke came with strings she was only beginning to understand. How long have you worked for Gianni? 8 years, Rico said. Declan's been with him for 6. We've seen what happens when protection fails. We won't let that happen to you. Why? The question emerged smaller than she intended. Why does he care this much? I'm just a waitress who noticed the wrong thing. You're the person who saved his life. Rico's expression softened. In Gianni's world, that creates bonds that don't break. Loyalty for loyalty. Protection for protection. You put yourself at risk for him. He'll move heaven and earth to ensure you don't regret it. Declan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting fractionally. He's here. Wants to check on her. Of course he does, Rico muttered, but there was affection beneath the exasperation. Let him up. Tessa's pulse kicked up for reasons that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the memory of Johnny's eyes. Storm gray and assessing, carrying the weight of someone who saw too much and forgot nothing. She stood, smoothing her clothes self-consciously, annoyed at herself for caring how she looked. The elevator chimed. Footsteps approached, measured, confident, the sound of someone who owned every space he entered. Then Gianni filled the doorway, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable. "Tessa, I wanted to ensure you were settling in comfortably." His voice carried that same careful courtesy from the restaurant, but his eyes swept the room, cataloging her emotional state with uncomfortable accuracy. As comfortable as possible for someone in protective custody. "I understand this isn't ideal, but it's necessary." He stepped inside and the room suddenly felt smaller. "Rico and Declan are the best. You're safe here." Safe. Trapped. Potato. A smile ghost across his expression, brief but genuine. "Fair point, but alive trumps comfortable. Always." He moved to the window, looking out over the city like a general surveying territory. "The people looking for you are professionals. Patient, methodical. They'll wait for an opening, a moment of carelessness, and they'll strike without hesitation. I won't give them that opening." "Because you feel responsible." "Because I am responsible." He turned to face her, the city lights behind him creating a halo effect that made him look almost otherworldly. "You put yourself in danger for me. That creates obligation. In my world, debts are sacred, and I always pay what I owe." Tessa wanted to argue, to insist she didn't want his protection or his obligation. But standing there in his penthouse with his bodyguards and his resources, she felt the exhaustion of 7 years spent looking over her shoulder, counting exits, trusting no one. And for the first time since her father died, she wasn't alone. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For this, for them, for caring enough to care." Something shifted in Gianni's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "Get some rest, Tessa. You're safe here. I promise." Then he was gone, leaving her with Rico and Declan and the unsettling realization that safety had arrived in the form of a mafia boss with storm gray eyes and a sense of obligation that apparently didn't have limits. But 3 days of forced proximity would reveal a truth Tessa wasn't ready to face. Safety had started to feel less like captivity and more like something dangerous. Something that felt like belonging. 3 days in the penthouse taught Tessa that proximity revealed truth faster than years of casual acquaintance. Rico was methodical, his routines precise, his presence somehow comforting despite being a walking reminder of danger. He made espresso at 6 a.m. with the focus of a religious ritual, trained in the building's private gym at 7, and spent his shifts monitoring security feeds with the kind of attention most people reserved for suspense novels. Declan was chaos wrapped in competence. Ex-military, Rico had mentioned, the kind who'd seen too much and survived anyway. He cooked like someone who'd learned from necessity, told stories that started funny and ended dark, and checked weapons with the casual efficiency of someone who viewed violence as a tool rather than a last resort. Both men treated her with careful courtesy, giving her space while remaining constantly aware of her location. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like being seen without judgment. A novel experience for someone who'd spent her life trying to disappear. Gianni visited daily, usually evenings, always briefly. He'd check on her welfare with the formality of a concerned employer, exchange a few words with Rico and Declan, then leave before the silence became uncomfortable. But Tessa noticed things. The way his gaze lingered on her face, assessing her emotional state with practiced accuracy. The slight relaxation in his shoulders when she confirmed she was fine. The tension that returned when he left, as if her safety required constant vigilance even from a distance. What Tessa found on day 4 would change everything, because vulnerability from a man like Gianni Rourke was more dangerous than any threat from his enemies. On day 4, she found him alone in the penthouse's library, a tumbler of whiskey untouched on the side table, his attention fixed on city lights that offered no answers. She should have retreated, given him privacy, maintained the careful distance they'd established. Instead, she sat in the chair opposite him. "Can't sleep?" Her voice broke the silence like a stone through glass. "Rarely do." He didn't look at her, but she felt his awareness shift, encompassing her presence without apparent effort. Comes with the territory. When you're responsible for an organization, for people's livelihoods and safety, sleep becomes a luxury. Sounds exhausting. It is. Finally, he turned to face her, and the unguarded expression in his eyes made her breath catch. But necessary. Leadership requires vigilance. Constant assessment. The moment you relax is the moment someone dies. That's a hell of a weight to carry. It's the weight I inherited. My father built the Venturi organization from nothing. Immigrants who understood that survival required strength and loyalty. He taught me that power isn't about violence. It's about knowing when to use it and when to show restraint. About protecting what's yours and honoring debts. His gaze held hers. About never abandoning people who put themselves at risk for you. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things neither would say. Tessa broke eye contact first, her pulse hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I'm not used to being protected. My father taught me to rely on myself, to trust no one, to assume everyone was a potential threat. Having people watching over me feels foreign. But not unwelcome?" She considered the question honestly. "No, not unwelcome, just unfamiliar. I keep waiting for the catch, for the moment when protection becomes control." "I don't want to control you, Tessa." Johnny's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I want you safe. There's a difference. You're not a possession or an asset. You're a person who made a choice that saved my life, and I will honor that choice by ensuring you don't regret it." But what Gianni was about to reveal would prove that his protection went deeper than obligation, and that terrified both of them. "Even if it means I'm trapped here indefinitely? Even if it means I dismantle an entire rival organization to remove the threat?" His expression was absolutely serious. "I have resources, Tessa. Influence, reach, and I'll use all of it to give you your life back. But until that happens, yes, you're here, protected, safe. Whether that feels like freedom or captivity is a matter of perspective." She should have been frightened by the casual way he discussed dismantling organizations. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to gratitude. "Why does this matter so much to you? You barely know me." "Because you saw me." The admission emerged quietly, almost vulnerable. "At that table, with Luca targeting me, you could have looked away. Protected yourself. Let nature take its course. But you chose to warn me. To put yourself in danger for a stranger. Do you understand how rare that is? How precious? I couldn't just let him. Most people would have." Gianni leaned forward, his intensity pinning her in place. "Most people protect themselves first. Always. It's human nature. But you chose differently. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are, and I don't abandon people worth knowing." The silence stretched between them, loaded with implications neither would voice. Finally, Gianni stood, draining the whiskey in one smooth motion. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, Rico wants to teach you basic self-defense, not because we expect trouble, but because knowledge is power, and you deserve both." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Tessa, I'm glad you're here, safe, where I can ensure nothing happens to you. The alternative doesn't bear thinking about." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the city lights and the dangerous realization that her safety had stopped feeling like captivity and started feeling like something else entirely. Something warm and terrifying and absolutely forbidden for a girl from her world trying to survive in his. But the enemies searching for Tessa weren't patient, and what they were planning would shatter the illusion that she was safe anywhere, even in Gianni's fortress. The second attempt came during her morning run in the building's private gym. Tessa had been doing intervals on the treadmill, Rico monitoring from his position near the weight bench, when Declan appeared in the doorway with his phone pressed to his ear and his expression carved from stone. Rico was moving before Declan spoke, positioning himself between Tessa and the gym's entrance, his hand inside his jacket, with the casual readiness of someone who'd made this motion countless times. Off, now. Declan's voice carried command that didn't allow debate. Tessa killed the treadmill, her heart rate climbing for reasons that had nothing to do with cardio. What's happening? Breach in the building's delivery system. Someone got past security with a package addressed to Gianni. X-ray shows components consistent with explosive devices. Declan was already moving her toward the panic room concealed behind the gym's supply closet. We're evacuating now. Rico, take her down. I'll secure the perimeter. The package, where is it? Being handled. Your job is to stay alive while we handle it. Rico's hand found her elbow, firm but not painful, guiding her toward the hidden door with practiced efficiency. This is what we train for, Tessa. Trust the process. The bomb was just the beginning. What Gianni discovered next would prove that his enemies had declared war, and Tessa was their primary target. The panic room was everything Declan had promised. Reinforced walls, independent air supply, communication systems that bypassed normal channels. Rico secured the door behind them, his movements economical. His attention divided between the security monitors and his phone. Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone except me, Declan, or Gianni. Not building security, not police, no one. His eyes held hers, making sure comprehension landed. Understood? Understood. Her voice came out steadier than her hands. But if that package is being neutralized by people far better qualified than me, my job is keeping you safe. Everything else is secondary. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, tension in his shoulders releasing fractionally. Bomb squad's on site. Gianni's been notified. He's en route. The wait felt eternal. Tessa sat on the panic room's bench, her psychology textbooks forgotten, her mind cataloging every worst-case scenario her father had ever described. This was his world. Packages that exploded. Threats that materialized without warning. Safety that was temporary at best. The door's security system chimed. Rico checked the monitor, verified identity, then unsealed the entrance. Gianni stepped through, his suit slightly disheveled, his expression carrying the kind of cold fury that made Tessa understand why people feared him. Are you hurt? His eyes swept over her, cataloging for injury with uncomfortable thoroughness. I'm fine. Rico got me here before they tried to murder you in my building. In my home. Gianni's voice was controlled, but violence simmered underneath like magma beneath thin crust. This is unacceptable. An escalation that requires response. What Gianni decided next would prove that his protection of Tessa went beyond obligation. It had become personal. And in his world, personal meant war. The package? Rico's question was careful, aware he was addressing someone barely containing rage. Neutralized. C4, remotely detonated, designed to take out anyone in the vicinity when triggered. If you hadn't moved her immediately, if Declan hadn't caught the breach. He stopped, jaw working, hands fisting at his sides. They targeted her in my building. That's a declaration of war. Tessa stood, her legs steadier than expected. Maybe I should leave. Go somewhere else. If being here makes me a target, you're a target anywhere. Gianni's attention snapped to her, his gray eyes burning with intensity that made her breath catch. That package wasn't about getting lucky. It was about sending a message that they know where you are, that they'll keep coming, that my protection isn't enough. So what do? We respond. The cold certainty in his voice was absolute. They made this about more than business, about more than territory. They made it personal by targeting someone under my protection. That requires consequences they'll remember. Rico and Declan exchanged glances. Some unspoken communication that suggested this wasn't their first experience with Gianni's particular brand of retribution. In the meantime, Gianni continued, his voice gentling fractionally when he looked at Tessa. You stay with me. Not here. Not in a location they've already compromised. Somewhere they can't access. Somewhere I can personally ensure your safety. Where? But even as she asked, Tessa saw the answer in his expression. The only place he trusted completely. The only sanctuary he controlled absolutely. My private residence. Not this building. My actual home. No one knows its location except my inner circle. Not even most of my organization. It's where I go when I need absolute security. His jaw tightened. It's where you'll stay until this threat is eliminated. Permanently. The implications settled over her like weight. Closer proximity, fewer barriers. The kind of forced intimacy that either forged connection or sparked disaster. Tessa should have protested, should have insisted on alternative arrangements. Instead, she found herself nodding. Okay, you're home. But Gianni, she waited until his eyes met hers. This can't go on forever. Living in fear, hiding, letting them control my life. Eventually, we have to end this. We will. The promise in his voice was absolute, carrying the weight of someone who'd never failed to deliver on threats. They came after you twice. There won't be a third time, I promise you that. And watching him stand there with violence barely contained and determination etched into every line of his body, Tessa believed him. More than that, she trusted him. The girl who'd learned to trust no one had started relying on a mafia boss whose world she'd spent her life avoiding. The irony wasn't lost on her. But standing there in the panic room with explosives being neutralized floors above, irony felt less important than survival. And survival meant trusting Gianni Rourke to do what he did best. Protect what was his with absolute, merciless efficiency. But the enemy had been planning this for weeks. And what happened during the transfer would prove that even Gianni's protection couldn't stop a well-executed abduction. The abduction happened during the transfer. Tessa was being moved from the compromised building to Gianni's private residence. Security protocols executed with military precision. Decoy vehicles, staggered departure times, routes that changed every 30 seconds. Rico and Declan flanked her in the back seat, their attention divided between windows and security feeds, their bodies positioned to shield her from any angle of attack. The accident looked legitimate. Car ran a red light, T-boned their SUV with enough force to trigger airbags and shatter glass, spinning them into an intersection where 3 more vehicles immediately converged. Rico was moving before the vehicle stopped spinning, his weapon drawn. But the gas grenade came through the broken window before he could fire. Declan lasted 15 seconds longer, his hand finding Tessa's arm in a grip that meant don't let go, before the sedative pulled him under too. Tessa fought the chemical pull with everything her father had taught her, but biology didn't care about training. The last thing she saw was masked figures dragging her from the wreckage, Rico and Declan unconscious and bleeding, and the terrible certainty that this was exactly what Gianni had been trying to prevent. What Tessa was about to experience would reveal the true cost of saving Gianni's life, and whether he valued her enough to sacrifice everything he'd built. She woke in darkness, her head pounding, zip ties cutting into her wrists, the taste of copper and chemicals coating her tongue. The space felt industrial. Concrete floors, distant mechanical hum, the kind of abandoned warehouse that dotted every city's forgotten districts. Her training kicked in automatically, cataloging details while pretending unconsciousness. 3 distinct voices, footsteps that suggested at least 5 people, the faint scent of river water indicating proximity to the docks. She's awake. The voice was accented, Eastern European, carrying professional detachment. Increase the dose if she struggles. Tessa opened her eyes slowly, letting them adjust to dim emergency lighting. The man standing over her was late 30s, military bearing, scar tissue visible on his hands from old burns. Behind him, 4 others, 2 guarding the entrance, 2 monitoring equipment that looked disturbingly medical. "Welcome back, Miss Rowan." The scarred man crouched to her eye level, his expression neither cruel nor kind. "I'm Alexei. We have mutual acquaintances who are very interested in having a conversation with you. If they wanted to talk, they could have called." Humor. Good. You'll need that. He stood, gesturing to someone outside her line of sight. "Bring the phone. Let's inform Mr. Rourke that his protection failed." The video call would force Gianni to make an impossible choice: his empire or the girl who saved him. And Alexei was betting on which one mattered more. The video call connected on the second ring. Gianni's face filled the screen, and Tessa saw the exact moment comprehension landed. The way his expression shifted from controlled concern to something dark and deadly. Rage so absolute it became cold calculation. "Alexei." His voice was winter steel. "I will kill everyone in that room. Slowly. After I kill everyone you've ever known. If she has so much as a bruise." Empty threats bore me, Rourke. Alexei angled the phone so Gianni could see Tessa clearly. "Your protection was impressive, but ultimately insufficient. The question now is, what's she worth to you? Territory? Resources? Perhaps your complete withdrawal from the harbor negotiations? Name your price." No hesitation. Absolute certainty. "Whatever you want. Just don't hurt her." Tessa found her voice, ignoring Alexei's warning gesture. "Gianni, don't. Whatever they're asking, don't give them." "Quiet." Alexei's hand covered her mouth, not violent, but firm. "Mr. Rourke, you have 12 hours to consider our terms. We'll send details. If you involve authorities or attempt rescue, she dies immediately. If you agree to our conditions, she'll be released unharmed. This is business, not personal. Don't make it complicated." The screen went dark. Alexei pocketed the phone, studying Tessa with something almost like respect. "You told him not to negotiate. That took courage. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. He won't give you what you want, and he will find me." "Perhaps." Alexei moved toward the warehouse entrance. "But by then, this will be finished. One way or another. I suggest you pray your value exceeds his pride. In my experience, powerful men choose principle over people. Every time." But Alexei had miscalculated, because Gianni Rourke had already made his choice, and it wasn't his empire. Left alone in darkness, Tessa tested her restraints. Professional grade, no obvious weaknesses. Her father's training cycled through escape strategies, but each required tools or opportunities she didn't have. She was trapped, leverage in a negotiation she didn't understand, dependent on Gianni making choices that could cost him everything he'd built. The hours crawled past. She dozed intermittently, waking to footsteps that approached but never resolved into rescue. Around hour 8, she heard raised voices. Alexei arguing with someone whose responses carried enough authority to make even him pause. Don't care about your timeline. Rourke hasn't responded. That means he's planning something. We need to move her before... The explosion came from the warehouse's eastern wall. Shaped charges that took out the entrance with surgical precision. Flashbangs followed, disorienting Alexei's people while armed figures in black tactical gear swarmed through the breach. Tessa recognized Declan first, his scarred face painted with camo, his weapon tracking with professional efficiency. Then Rico, moving like violence personified, clearing the space with the kind of controlled brutality that came from extensive training and absolute motivation. What walked through that smoke would prove that Gianni Rourke had chosen her over everything, and there was no going back from that. Then Gianni, looking nothing like the controlled businessman from the restaurant. His suit was gone, replaced by tactical gear that made him look exactly like what he was. A predator who'd spent 8 hours hunting, who'd mobilized every resource he possessed, who'd burned through whatever restraint normally governed his actions. His eyes found hers across the warehouse, and the relief that washed over his expression was so raw it hurt to witness. "Clear!" Rico's voice echoed through the space. 4 hostiles down, 1 fleeing. Primary target secured. Gianni was moving before Rico finished speaking, crossing to where Tessa sat bound, his hands gentle despite the violence still humming in his frame. He cut her restraints with a blade that appeared from somewhere, his movements careful, his attention fixed on her face like she might disappear if he looked away. "Are you hurt? Did anyone?" His voice cracked on the question, control fracturing after 8 hours of holding it together. "I'm fine. Bruised, scared, but fine." She touched his face before thinking, her fingers registering the tension in his jaw. "You came." "Always." The word was absolute. "Tessa, I will always come. No matter the cost. No matter what I have to burn down. You're mine to protect. Mine to keep safe. And I failed." "You didn't fail. They got lucky. You got me back." She leaned forward, her forehead touching his, their breathing synchronizing. "Gianni, I knew you'd come. Never doubted it. Not once." What Gianni confessed next would change everything, because vulnerability from a man like him was rarer than any treasure, and more dangerous than any weapon. Something shifted in his expression, the violence receding, replaced by something softer and somehow more dangerous. "They took you from me, made you afraid, made me..." He stopped, jaw working. "I can't do this anymore. Can't keep my distance. Can't pretend you're just someone I'm protecting. Because you're not. You're everything. Do you understand? Everything." The confession hung between them, raw and undeniable. Tessa should have pulled back, should have maintained the careful distance they'd preserved. Instead, she kissed him, fierce and desperate and absolutely certain, tasting adrenaline and relief and the promise of something neither could take back. When they broke apart, Gianni's expression held wonder and determination in equal measure. "Let's go home. The real one. Where you'll be safe. Where I can see you. Where this..." He gestured between them. "Can be whatever it needs to be." Tessa nodded, too exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed to do anything else. But as Gianni lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the extraction vehicle, she realized she'd stopped running, stopped fighting the pull between them, stopped pretending that safety and love were mutually exclusive. She'd found both in the most unlikely place, in the arms of a mafia boss who'd moved heaven and earth to bring her home. Gianni's private residence was nothing like the penthouse. It was a restored Victorian in a neighborhood that valued privacy, surrounded by walls and security that looked decorative but was absolutely functional. Inside, the space felt like a home rather than a showpiece. Lived-in furniture, Books with cracked spines, photographs that showed a younger Gianni with people who were clearly family. But what they were about to say to each other would determine whether this was the beginning of something real, or the last mistake they'd ever make. He settled her onto the living room sofa with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence he'd displayed hours earlier. His hands lingered on her shoulders, reassuring himself she was real and present. "You need to rest. Rico's called a doctor to check you over." "I'm fine, Gianni. Really." Tessa caught his hand, holding it between both of hers. "But we need to talk. About what you said. About this." He sat beside her, close enough that their thighs touched, his expression vulnerable in ways she'd never witnessed. "I meant every word. You're not just someone I'm protecting. Haven't been for days. Maybe never were. I'm a waitress from community college who happened to notice the wrong thing at the right time. You're falling for you." The confession emerged quietly but absolutely. "Have been since you slipped me that napkin. Since you put yourself at risk for a stranger. Since you trusted me enough to let me protect you even when it meant giving up your freedom." Tessa's throat tightened. "This is crazy. We're from completely different worlds. I grew up counting exits. You grew up running an empire. What we're feeling, it's probably just adrenaline, proximity, the intensity of the situation." "Do you believe that?" Gianni's hand cupped her face, tilting her chin so their eyes met. "Really? Because I don't. I've lived through plenty of intense situations. Felt adrenaline more times than I can count. This is different. You are different." "How?" "Because you see me, not the position, not the reputation, not the threat. You see the person underneath, the one who carries too much weight and makes impossible choices and doesn't sleep because he's responsible for too many lives." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You looked at me in that restaurant like I was worth saving. Do you understand how rare that is?" But Tessa was terrified. Because choosing Gianni meant choosing danger forever, and she'd spent her whole life running from exactly that. "Everyone's worth saving, Gianni. Not in my world. In my world, people are assets or liabilities, allies or enemies, resources to be managed or threats to be eliminated. But you..." He stopped, searching for words. "You make me want to be more than what I've become, more than my father's legacy, more than the sum of my choices." Tessa felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I'm terrified. Of this. Of you. Of what it means to care about someone whose life includes bombs and kidnappings and violence as business tools." "I know. And I can't promise that stops. Can't promise normal or safe or ordinary. My world is what it is. Dangerous, complicated, unforgiving." His forehead touched hers. "But I can promise that I will never stop protecting you. Never stop choosing you. Never stop being someone worthy of the trust you placed in me when you wrote those 9 words. That's not enough to build on." "Then what is?" His voice carried challenge and plea in equal measure. "Tell me what you need. What would make this possible? And I'll move heaven and earth to give it to you." What Tessa demanded next would determine whether this was love or just another form of captivity dressed in better clothes. Tessa pulled back slightly, holding his gaze with everything she had. Honesty, complete transparency. No more decisions made for my own good without consulting me. If I'm choosing this, choosing you, then I'm choosing all of it. The danger, the complications, the reality of your world. But I need to be a partner in that choice, not a protected asset. Done. No hesitation. Absolute certainty. You want honesty? Here it is. I'm in love with you, Tessa Rowan. Completely. Irrationally. to the point where the thought of losing you literally stopped my heart for 8 hours. You make me feel things I didn't think I was capable of anymore. Hope, vulnerability, the desire to be better than I am. Gianni, I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. I know every logical reason why we shouldn't work. But logic doesn't explain why I trust you when I trust no one. Why your safety matters more than my territory. Why the idea of you leaving feels like losing something essential. His hands framed her face, his expression absolutely open. So yes, I'm in love with you. And I need to know, is there any possibility you feel the same? This is the moment that defines everything. Tessa has a choice. Choose safety by walking away, or choose love in a world that punishes it. She spent 7 years building walls to protect herself. 7 years learning to trust no one. 7 years running from the chaos that killed her father. And now Gianni, the most dangerous man she's ever known, is asking her to stay, to trust, to believe that love can exist in a world built on violence. If you've ever had to choose between the safe path and the person who makes you feel alive, if you've ever had to decide whether love is worth the risk when the cost could be everything, leave a comment below. This is the villain in Tessa's story. The belief that safety and love can't coexist. That caring about someone dangerous means losing yourself. That the only way to survive is to stay alone. Hit subscribe if you believe some people are worth the risk, even when logic screams to run. Because what Tessa says next will determine not just her future, but whether love can survive in a world that views it as weakness. Tessa felt the walls she'd spent 7 years building crumble under the weight of his honesty. Her father had taught her to trust no one, to assume everyone was a threat, to protect herself above all else. But Gianni had proven that protection could come from partnership, that trust could be earned, that love could exist even in worlds built on violence. I feel the same. The admission emerged like a weight lifting. It terrifies me, goes against every instinct I've developed. But yes, I'm in love with you, with the man who moved heaven and earth to bring me home, who sees me as a person rather than an obligation, who makes me feel safe while simultaneously being the most dangerous person I've ever known. The kiss was different this time, not desperate or adrenaline-fueled, but certain and promising and absolutely real. Gianni kissed her like she was precious, like he had all the time in the world, like he'd finally found something worth more than power or territory or control. When they broke apart, his smile was transformative. Genuine joy that made him look younger, softer, entirely human rather than the controlled businessman or deadly predator she'd witnessed. So we're doing this. Really doing this. Apparently. Tessa laughed, the sound emerging shaky but real. Against all logic and self-preservation instincts, I'm dating a mafia boss. You're dating someone who worships the ground you walk on and will spend every day proving you made the right choice. His expression turned serious. It won't be easy, Tessa. My world will try to eat you alive. There will be danger, complications, sacrifices neither of us can predict. I know, but I've spent 7 years being alone, being safe but empty, building walls that protected me from connection. She touched his face, memorizing the exact shade of gray in his eyes. I'm done running. Done hiding. If the cost of being with you is facing danger, then that's infinitely better than spending another 7 years wondering what I'm missing. Then welcome home. Gianni pulled her close, wrapping her in arms that promised safety and future and everything her hyper-vigilant heart had learned to live without. To chaos and complications and a life that will never be ordinary, but will always be ours. Tessa settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. They'd survive this, somehow, together, They'd build something real from the wreckage of what should have been a simple warning in an upscale restaurant. And for the first time in 7 years, she felt something beyond fear or vigilance or careful isolation. She felt hope. But 3 months later, Tessa would discover whether the love they'd built could survive in the real world, or if danger would always find them. 3 months later, Tessa stood in Bellacosta's back office, reviewing her new contract as the restaurant's security consultant. Turns out, a waitress who could spot an assassin made an excellent advisor on protective protocols, and the restaurant's owner had been more than willing to create a position that let her stay connected to the world she'd briefly inhabited. Gianni leaned against the doorframe, watching her read with an expression that still made her pulse skip despite 3 months of proximity. They'd navigated the complicated reality of their relationship, her finishing her degree, him managing his organization, both of them learning to balance danger with domesticity in ways neither had expected. "You didn't have to do this," she said, gesturing at the contract. "Create a position just so I could feel useful." "I didn't create anything. You earned it. Giuseppe genuinely values your expertise." Gianni moved into the room, pulling her close with the casual possessiveness that had become second nature. "Though I admit I appreciate you working somewhere I can ensure security protocols are properly maintained." Control freak. Concerned boyfriend. He kissed her forehead. "There's a difference." Rico appeared in the doorway, his phone in hand. "We got confirmation. Alexei's organization has been fully dismantled. No more threats, no more targets. You're officially clear." This was the moment Tessa had been waiting for. Freedom. Real freedom. The kind that came not from hiding, but from knowing the threat was gone forever. The relief that washed through Tessa was physical. 3 months of elevated security, of looking over her shoulder, of wondering when the next attempt would come. And now, freedom. The genuine kind that came from knowing the threat was eliminated rather than just managed. How? But even as she asked, Tessa knew. Gianni had spent 3 months systematically dismantling Alexei's network, using every resource at his disposal, ensuring the threat would never resurface. However was necessary. Gianni's voice carried no apology. "They came after you. Made it personal. That required permanent solution. Now you're safe. Really safe. For the first time since you wrote those 9 words." Tessa should have been disturbed by the casual discussion of dismantling organizations. Instead, she felt gratitude and something deeper, the certainty that Gianni would always put her safety first, no matter the cost. "So what now?" She looked up at him, seeing past the dangerous exterior to the man who'd proven himself worthy of trust. "We just live? Like normal people?" "Define normal." Declan's voice carried from the doorway where he'd joined Rico. "Because if normal means boring dinner parties and Sunday brunches, I'm out. Normal means we stop running, stop looking over our shoulders, start building something that isn't defined by threats." Johnny's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "It means you finish your degree. Work here. Keep being brilliant and observant and everything that made me fall for you. It means I continue running my organization but come home to you every night. It means we figure out what our version of normal looks like. In your world, normal includes armed security and background checks on dinner guests." "Yes, but it also includes this." He gestured between them. "Us. Together. Building something real from the mess we started with. That's worth whatever adjustments normal requires." Rico cleared his throat. "Speaking of adjustments, we should discuss the new protocols for when she's at the restaurant. Bellacosta's security is adequate, but you're going to enhance it anyway because that's what you do." Tessa smiled at both men who'd become more than bodyguards. "Fine. Enhance away. As long as I get to live without panic rooms and safe houses." "Deal." Gianni pulled her toward the door. Now come on. We have reservations at that Italian place you like. The one where the owner doesn't know what I do and treats us like we're ordinary. What Tessa had found was rarer than safety. She'd found a love that didn't require her to choose between who she was and who she loved. They walked out together, Gianni, Tessa, Rico, and Declan, looking like any group of friends rather than a mafia boss, his girlfriend, and their security detail. But Tessa had learned that appearances were deceiving, that love could exist in complicated spaces, that safety didn't require isolation. Her father had taught her to trust no one. Gianni had taught her that trust, once earned, was the most powerful protection of all. Hey. She stopped on the sidewalk, turning to face him. Thank you. For everything. For keeping me safe. For showing me that caring about someone doesn't mean losing myself. For being worth the risk. Thank you for writing those 9 words. His smile was transformative. For seeing danger and choosing to intervene. For trusting me enough to let me protect you. For loving me despite everything that love requires. Listen. Fake waiter. Armed. Left side. Tessa recited the words that had changed everything. 9 words that gave me a life I never imagined. 9 words that gave me someone worth protecting more than territory, more than power, more than control. Gianni kissed her, right there on the sidewalk, with Rico and Declan pretending not to watch. Best 9 words I ever read. They walked toward the restaurant, navigating the city together, building a future from a warning on a napkin. It wasn't the life Tessa had planned, complicated, dangerous, requiring constant vigilance, but it was hers. Earned through choices that scared her, and a man who'd proven himself worthy of those choices. Her father had taught her to count exits. Gianni had taught her that sometimes the scariest choice was staying, trusting someone enough to stop running, building something real from the wreckage of what should have been impossible. And as they entered the restaurant with the warmth of evening wrapping around them, Tessa realized she'd finally found what she'd been searching for since her father died. Home. Safety. Love. Not despite the danger, but because of how they'd navigated it together. 9 words on a napkin. A lifetime of consequences. And a love worth every complicated moment. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to see more stories like this. Share it with someone who believes love can survive impossible odds. Your support keeps these stories alive.